Welcome to POTUS 2016, where we call the presidential horse race and pour cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. Rhetoric which is flooding living rooms in Iowa right now as voters get set to caucus on Monday. One local news program ran 14 spots in a single half hour. Over $50 million has been spent on TV ads so far in Iowa. And according to Nate Silver's blog, 538, 17,000 TV ads will have aired there between January 1st and Monday. Ads like this.
I mean, hey, I lived in New York City and Manhattan all my life, okay? So, my views are a little bit different than if I lived in Iowa.
They are different, like on abortion.
Would President Trump ban partial birth abortion?
Well, look, I am pro-choice in every respect.
And what does Trump think about Iowa?
How stupid are the people of Iowa?
Donald Trump, New York values, not ours.
My views are a little bit different than if I lived in Iowa.
I'm Ted Cruz, and I approve this message.
Though a new survey suggests that very ad and similar ones only strengthen Donald Trump's appeal among blue-collar voters, you would think he would relish the chance to go after Cruz at the GOP debate scheduled for tomorrow, Thursday. But he's not showing up, claiming Fox moderator Megyn Kelly is biased against him. Trump had been negotiating to have her removed, but Fox would not tell her, "You're fired." In fact, they said the network would not give in to, quote, terrorizations toward any of our employees. But I wonder, is this really about Megyn Kelly, who triggered Trump's ire back in August with hardball questions? Maybe. Or with the Iowa race so close, Trump may be thinking, why risk Cruz grabbing control of the debate? I'm safer coasting to the finish. On to Bernie's final sprint. In contrast to the thousands of attack and tough on terror ads that Iowans have been subjected to, his new spot is joyful.
Let us be lovers, we'll marry our fortunes together. I've got some real estate here in my bag. Counting the cars on the New Jersey Turnpike, they've all come to look for America. All come to look for America. All come to look for America.
I'm Bernie Sanders, and I approve this message.
Sarah Palin would call that hopey-changey, for sure. This week, Iowans also got to watch a CNN forum with the three Democratic candidates. In a tight race and needing to get her message out, Clinton worked with Sanders and Martin O'Malley to hastily arrange one more big event, actually broadcast, unlike the Democratic debates, on a weeknight when more people watch. This was not a debate, but rather three consecutive interviews, mostly with stump speech answers, but some audience questions evoked revealing responses. Though it was disguised as a civics lesson, this answer from Clinton sounded very much like she was asking young Sanders supporters to switch to her after she loses Iowa but wins the nomination. The question came from first-time caucus goer Taylor Gipple.
There's a lot of young people like myself who are very passionate supporters of Bernie Sanders, and I just don't see the same enthusiasm from younger people for you. In fact, I've heard from quite a few people my age that they think you're dishonest, but I'd like to hear from you on why you feel the enthusiasm isn't there.
Well, I think it really depends upon who you're seeing and talking to. Today in Oskaloosa, I spent time with about 10 high school students who are enthusiastically working for me. I see young people across the state who are doing the same. But I'm totally happy to see young people involved in any way. That's what we want. And we want to have a good primary to pick a nominee, and then we want to have everybody join together to make sure we win in November, which, after all, is the purpose of this whole campaign. And so, you know, look, I've been around a long time. People have thrown all kinds of things at me. And, you know, I can't keep up with it. I just keep going forward. They fall by the wayside. They come up with these outlandish things. They make these charges. I just keep going forward because there's nothing to it.
On the offense there, but Clinton generally appeared relaxed at the forum, perhaps buoyed by the weekend endorsements from the Boston Globe and Des Moines Register. However, the web-savvy Sanders team did manage to blunt that Register endorsement. They bought a large online ad that covered the Register's homepage, plus some distracting pop-ups. But Bernie could not erase the near endorsement Hillary got from President Obama. In an interview with Politico, the president seemed to dismiss Sanders as a new, bright, shiny object that would naturally draw attention, while praising Hillary as a progressive who is wicked smart and knows every policy inside out, a person who could get things done. But do Iowa Democrats agree with Obama? And just how close are Trump and Cruz as they lean into the first turn? Yes, time for the horse race. If we have learned anything so far this cycle, what a candidate says can rewrite the news headlines. February, however, is when actual votes tell donors and volunteers who is doing well and who is crashing. We should also begin to understand the accuracy of the tidal wave of poll numbers that have shaped the political landscape. But until that time comes, let's take one more look at what the polls predict. Nate Silver and his 538 staff have weighed the various polls according to their methodology and historical performance and have come up with some predictions for the close Republican race in Iowa. Right now, if just state polling data is used, Trump is predicted to come out on top in Iowa with 31% of the vote to Cruz's 27%. Rubio places third with 13%, with Carson at 8.4%. But when you include national polls, the top two finishers flip, with Ted Cruz besting Donald Trump 27 to 26%. Rubio again places third, now with almost 15%. And notice how the lower end of the field is also catching up with Carson. An important factor in this year's outsider narrative is whether or not such candidates can actually get out the vote, a question that has only become more relevant with such tight races as in Iowa. Are Trump supporters reliable voters? And Bernie Sanders could have difficulty if conventional wisdom about his many younger supporters holds true. Young people often don't show up. The New York Times Upshot looked at the methodology behind Monday's Democratic polls from Iowa and found a significant difference between Hillary and Bernie supporters. Some polls relied on participants polled from voter registration files. Among those who had previously registered to vote, Hillary Clinton was the winner across the board. But when the survey used a more random sample, likely including demographic groups less inclined to show up at the polls, Sanders came out ahead. In other words, real doubts about Bernie's turnout. In case you were wondering about that 2008 Iowa candidate, popular with the young and hopeful, who did turn out caucus goers in record numbers, Barack Obama beat John Edwards and Hillary Clinton with support that was more diverse and less dependent on young people. Lowering expectations yesterday, Bernie weighed in to say that while he may not have Obama's 2008 turnout, it'll be enough. Okay, time to discuss all this and to learn just how Monday's Iowa caucuses actually work. Joining us from Des Moines, Laura Bellin, primary author of the Iowa community blog called Bleeding Heartland. And with us here in New York, Columbia University political scientist Esther Fuchs, currently serving as director of who'sontheballot.org, an initiative to turn more citizens into voters. Welcome to both of you.
Hi, Brian.
Thank you for having me.
Laura, how different are the rules for the Democratic and the Republican caucuses?
Well, they're profoundly different. The Republican caucuses operate much like a straw poll. So people show up at the precinct location, and after a little bit of business at the beginning, paper ballots are handed out. They're blank pieces of paper. Everyone who's there gets to write a candidate's name, fold up the piece of paper, which is then passed to the front, and the ballots are counted right there. The totals are announced right there, and that's the end of it. And the state Republican Party will release the statewide numbers for how many people filled out their ballots for each of the candidates. The Democratic caucuses are a scramble for delegates, not votes. No ballots are filled out, and the number of delegates for each precinct depends on a lot of things, mainly voter performance for Democratic candidates at the top of the ticket in the last 2 elections. So in my precinct, I'll need 15% of the people in the room will have to support a certain candidate to be viable. And if the candidates who don't have that much support in the room, their supporters will have to realign and go with one of the other groups for the viable candidates. And the Iowa Democratic Party will never report the raw number of people who were there standing in the corners of Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, or Martin O'Malley. They will only report the number of delegates that the candidates won. And they'll convert those county delegates that are assigned at the precinct caucuses into what they call state delegate equivalences. And that's what you will hear on caucus night.
So, based on what you just said, a big question will be whether Martin O'Malley in the Democratic caucuses reaches 15%, which I imagine is unlikely. And if he doesn't, who his supporters are going to fall off to in a close Clinton-Sanders race, and they could make the difference, right?
Well, in most precincts, he's unlikely to reach that 15% threshold. However, the number of delegates assigned for a precinct is fixed, and it becomes a zero-sum game. So occasionally what can happen in the room is, let's say the Martin O'Malley group is a few people short of the viability threshold, and let's say Bernie Sanders has more supporters than Hillary Clinton. And in the case of my precinct, which assigns 6 delegates, maybe if Martin O'Malley were not viable, Hillary and Bernie would each get 3 delegates. But maybe if one of the viable groups can donate a few supporters over to O'Malley and bring him up to 1 delegate, then the split could be 3 for Bernie, 2 for Hillary, and 1 for O'Malley. Right. So it's possible that O'Malley may become viable in more precincts than his polling numbers would appear. But certainly in most of the state's precincts, he's not likely to reach that threshold. And I don't sense any huge swing toward, I don't sense that the O'Malley supporters will en masse go toward Hillary or Bernie. I think that individuals will make their own decisions.
And it's not winner take all, which is interesting. Esther, do you think that Iowa and New Hampshire matter to who the ultimate nominees are on each side as much as all the press attention they get in this run-up? These are small states with relatively few delegates to the conventions.
Well, normally we would look at the past to understand what will happen in the future, but if we look at this race and so far what's been happening, I don't think the past provides us with much information about how to predict the outcome here. The one thing we can say about Iowa and New Hampshire is it does create momentum for candidates and increases their donor base. So to the extent that you win one of those 2 races, it's likely to increase the amount of money that you get spent on your campaign, both from the independent PACs as well as directly to the campaign. But, you know, in 2008, Mike Huckabee won Iowa, and in 2012, Rick Santorum won Iowa. I don't recall either of them running for the presidency. So I think Iowa is actually more difficult to predict from than even New Hampshire. John McCain won New Hampshire. Mitt Romney won New Hampshire. So on the Republican side, I think New Hampshire is probably a more important race in terms of predicting the future.
So, Laura, given that history, we did not ultimately see President Huckabee or President Santorum, and we could go back from there. Mm-hmm. What do Iowans really think they're up to here in terms of their national impact?
Well, I think Iowans like to think of the caucuses as a place where everyone gets a fair shake and nothing is a foregone conclusion. And certainly Iowa Democrats, many of them are proud that the caucuses vaulted Barack Obama to the position, even though he didn't win the New Hampshire primary and he didn't lock up the nomination quickly. Certainly, if he hadn't won the Iowa caucuses, he would not have been the Democratic nominee. I don't think that's a question in anyone's mind. I think Hillary Clinton was ahead in South Carolina polls by something like 20 points before the 2008 Iowa caucuses.
So Iowa delivered for us Jimmy Carter also, I remember, for the Democratic Party, and Barack Obama, and It seems to me Iowa is not representative of the rest of the country, and if the Democratic Party was smart, they would remove this front-runner status from Iowa to represent the urban voters that make up the majority of the Democratic Party.
Well, I mean, Iowans would say that the process should start in a small state where not everything depends on media dollars and mass population. But I certainly understand that argument. It's an argument you even hear among some Iowans.
So, Laura, has there been less town-to-town and house-to-house campaigning this year than in the past? Is it more of a media-driven, nationalized election, the way Trump is running it, for example, and some of the others, and Iowa just happens to go first?
I think on the Republican side, it is more of a media-driven event, and I don't fully understand. Of course, Trump is a special kind of celebrity, but for instance, Marco Rubio has not put together the kind of traditional ground game that we would see in an Iowa caucus campaign, and I have no idea why. It seems to me that Ted Cruz is the only candidate on the Republican side running a real ground game, and so I'm not a big believer in the polls that show Trump leading in Iowa. I mean, we'll see if those people who show up at his mass rallies actually turn out to caucus. On the Democratic side, I think just because Hillary Clinton had that superstar status already, and then Bernie Sanders got so much traction, they've been having much larger events than usual. But Martin O'Malley has still been doing a lot of the smaller traditional events. And there still have been plenty of house parties featuring surrogates for the candidates or field organizers for the candidates. All of that has been going on this past year.
All right, Laura Bellin, thank you very much. Esther Feeks are going to stay with us as we roll out some additional Iowa evidence. It's time for Evidence-Based Politics, where we meet a scholar who has studied an issue oversimplified by campaign rhetoric. Many will dismiss the Iowa caucuses because the voting is held so early and in a largely rural state with few non-white voters. But in fact, it could be considered a swing state. It has voted down the middle of the political spectrum for 2 decades and has a high number of independents. And the state has gotten increasingly urban with Asian and Latino immigrants. How much have these changes affected political views in the heartland? Our next guest has done a study of this, tracking 5 small towns in Iowa from 2001 to 2011. She is Celeste Lay, who joins us via Skype from New Orleans, where she is a professor of political science at Tulane University. Her book is entitled A Midwestern Mosaic: Immigration and Political Socialization in Rural America. Hello from New York. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
So I see you had 5 towns in your study, 3 that were all white, basically with no immigrants, 2 with growing Latino immigrant population, one of which already had Asians. Describe those 2 latter towns.
In one of the towns in 1990, there were it was pretty much 99% white, native-born, and most of those were born in Iowa. So in the other town, there was a small population of Laotian refugees that started in the 1970s to come and settle in Storm Lake, Iowa. And their population grew, but not very significantly throughout the 80s. They made up about 1 to 2% of the town's population in 1990. And then in both of these communities throughout the 90s up until 2000, and then continuing really into the mid 2005, 2006 part, their immigration simply just took off. Now in Storm Lake schools, Anglo whites are a minority, and in Perry about 30% of the community is Latino. So significant demographic change.
So how much political change, and particularly change in political attitudes toward immigration among the white voters, did you see in those towns?
Well, interestingly, in terms of the attitudes of the white voters, there was an initial period of hostility / sort of suspicion. The white community, it took a little while to sort of grasp that this was not just a temporary phenomenon. And but after 4 or 5 years, particularly when these new immigrants began to bring their wives and their children, because for the most part, for the first several years, these were just men who were there to work. And then there was a lot of turnover and transients. But as some began to settle and bring their families, these towns began to welcome them. Not everybody, of course. There were some rough moments here and there, particularly in the 90s. But after about 2000, most of the white residents that I spoke with talked about this being a very good thing for their community.
How much are the immigrant families citizens at this point, and will they caucus?
Probably not. There are now second and among children, third generation, so many U.S. citizens do live there. But in talking to many of the immigrant activists and Latino activists in these communities, they haven't been as successful in terms of getting those that are eligible to register to vote. Still, probably a majority of those are not eligible to vote, either because they're undocumented or because they're not U.S. citizens. They have work permits, that sort of thing.
I'm curious whether or not the white voters, the white residents in these communities, were they more likely to be registered Democrats or registered Republicans to begin with? And was there any shift in this time period that you looked at?
That's a good question. The community of Perry is about 40 minutes from Des Moines. And so it has begun to look a bit more like a suburb over time. And it is sort of a bit of a Democratic stronghold in a very Republican county. So in county elections and congressional elections, they're all controlled by Republicans. But this particular community has a somewhat strong Democratic Party. Now, that's relative to the surrounding areas. Storm Lake is a very different story. Congressman Steve King was born in Storm Lake. That's where he's from.
Very right-wing Republican congressman.
Yeah, it's a very Republican county, Republican town. And yet, when you talk to these native white Iowans about immigration in Storm Lake, they view it as primarily a positive thing, that it has helped their communities economically. It has prevented them from sort of going down the road of lots of other rural white communities in Iowa, which is sort of to age and sort of die out.
Very briefly before we run out of time, for our viewers not in Iowa, are these just isolated towns representative only of themselves, or did they tell us something about larger trends in the state?
Well, there are more of them than you would think. I mean, I only studied 2 of them in this book and compared them to the white communities. But there are probably about 20 of these communities, and they're spread throughout the state. And so it's not just in sort of one region or one congressional district. They're all over the state. And I think the interesting thing, the unique thing about these communities is that the more exposure that these residents have with immigrants, the less sort of hardcore anti-immigrant they are.
Interesting. So familiarity breeds trust more than contempt. Esther.
But does that really impact their policy views? So there's always that situation, I like the person who lives next door to me, but when you ask me the broader question, I'm still anti-immigrant. So I'm wondering whether or not there's been any interaction between that experience at the block level in the neighborhoods.
And about 20 seconds.
Well, most of the people, particularly in Storm Lake, the hardcore Republican area, are Republican, they say, for many other reasons. That They want to see strong borders. They would like to see a path to citizenship for immigrants. They'd like to see immigration reform, but they are more concerned about big government and a lot of other sort of typical Republican issues.
Thank you very much. And in our last 30 seconds, Esther Fuchs, if you can give us just a soundbite on your Who's on the Ballot initiative and your former boss, Michael Bloomberg, and whether he's going to get into the race.
Well, I've got this amazing website that I worked on with all kinds of people. It's called who'sontheballot.org, and we'll be up and running for the general election and the primaries. And it's intended to make it easy for people to get information about who's on their ballot and where to vote.
And Bloomberg?
And Bloomberg, you know, if Hillary messes up and loses on Super Tuesday in a big way, I think he's in there.
Esther, thank you very much. And that's POTUS 2016 for today. Join us each week at this hour as we call the presidential horse race and pour cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. Next time, the Iowa results analyzed and a look ahead to the New Hampshire primary, which is the following week. The shift from polling to actual voting begins. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for letting us help you through this intense but important journey.